Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church's online worship service. Today, Pastor Kris Cervantes will talk about radical nonviolence, sacred relic, or true third way. The concept of nonviolence has long been held up as an ideal by some of the most influential and effective social justice leaders across many years and cultures. But what does it actually mean? And what does nonviolence mean to us today? Thank you for joining our community.
Our call to worship this morning comes to us from Thomas Merton. A theology of love cannot be allowed merely to serve the interests of the rich and powerful, justifying their wars, their violence, and their bombs, while exhorting the poor and underprivileged to practice patience, meekness, long-suffering, and to solve their problems, if at all, non-violently. A theology of love may also conceivably turn out to be a theology of revolution. In any case, it is a theology of resistance, a refusal of the evil that reduces a brother or sister to homicidal desperation. Instead of preaching to others and advising them to suffer patiently the violence which we sweetly impose upon them with the aid of armies and police, we might conceivably recognize the right of the less fortunate to use force and study more seriously the practice of nonviolence and humane methods on our own part when, as it happens, we possess the most stupendous arsenal of power the world has ever known. Come, hear the call, take up this banner, join with me in an exploration of a theology of love.
May the light of this chalice give light and warmth to our community when we are joyful and when we despair. And may we feel the warmth spread from our circle to wider and wider circles until all know they belong to the one circle of life. As Unitarian Universalists, we come together from a variety of backgrounds with many different beliefs. What binds us is purpose and our shared covenant. Please join me now in saying it together. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. Think it's time we start. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right, everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. We gotta stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Our reading today is from Martin Luther King Jr. in his book, Stride for Freedom, The Montgomery Story. It was published in 1958, and this is from chapter 6, where he is discussing his own journey and search for nonviolence. It's titled Pilgrimage to Nonviolence. King writes, like most people, I had heard of Gandhi, but had never studied him seriously. As I read his words, I became deeply fascinated by his campaigns of nonviolent resistance. The whole concept of satyagraha, satya is truth, which equals love, and agraha is force. So satyagraha, therefore, means truth force or love force, was profoundly significant to me. As I delved deeper into the philosophy of Gandhi, my skepticism concerning the power of love gradually diminished, and I came to see for the first time its potency in the area of social reform. Love for Gandhi was a potent instrument for social and collective transformation. It was in this Gandhian emphasis on love and nonviolence that I discovered the method for social reform that I had been seeking for so many months. My study of Gandhi convinced me that true pacifism is not non-resistance to evil, but nonviolent resistance to evil. Between the two positions, there is a world of difference. Gandhi resisted evil with as much vigor and power as the violent resistor, but he resisted with love instead of hate. True pacifism is not unrealistic submission to evil power. It is rather a courageous confrontation of evil by the power of love, in the faith that it is better to be the recipient of violence than the inflictor of it, since the latter only multiplies the existence of violence and bitterness in the universe, while the former may develop a sense of shame in the opponent and thereby bring about a transformation and a change of heart. First, it must be emphasized that nonviolent resistance is not a method for cowards. It does resist. If one uses this method because they're afraid or merely because they lack the instruments of violence, they're not truly nonviolent. The phrase passive resistance often gives the false impression that this is a sort of do-nothing method in which the resistor quietly and passively accepts evil, but nothing is further from the truth. For while the nonviolent resistor is passive in the sense of not being physically aggressive toward the opponent, their mind and emotions are always active, constantly seeking to persuade the opponent that they're wrong. The method is passive physically, but strongly active spiritually. A second basic fact of nonviolence is that it does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win friendship and understanding. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. A third characteristic is that the attack is directed against forces of evil rather than against persons who happen to be doing the evil. It is evil that the nonviolent resistor seeks to defeat, not the persons victimized by evil. A fourth point that characterizes nonviolent resistance is a willingness to accept suffering without retaliation, to accept blows from the opponent without striking back. Rivers of blood may have to flow before we gain our freedom, but it must be our blood, Gandhi said to his countrymen. The nonviolent resistor is willing to accept violence if necessary, but never to inflict it. One may well ask, what is the nonviolent resistor's justification for this ordeal to which they invite us, for this mass political application of the ancient doctrine of turning the other cheek? The answer is found in the realization that unearned suffering is redemptive. Suffering, the nonviolent resistor realizes, has tremendous educational and transforming possibilities. Things of fundamental importance to people are not secured by reason alone, but have to be purchased with their suffering, says Gandhi. He continues, suffering is infinitely more powerful than the law of the jungle for converting the opponent and opening ears which are otherwise shut to the voice of reason. A fifth point is that it avoids not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of spirit. The nonviolent resistor not only refuses to shoot the opponent, but also refuses to hate him. At the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. Love, agape, is the only cement that can hold a broken community together. When I am commanded to love, I am commanded to restore community, to resist injustice, and to meet the needs of my siblings. A sixth basic fact about nonviolent resistance is that it is based on the conviction that the universe is on the side of justice. Consequently, the believer in nonviolence has deep faith in the future.
A reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 38 through 48, from the Sermon on the Mount, the words of Jesus. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of our God in heaven. For God makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. If you love only those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters and siblings, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your God in heaven is perfect. And now I want to tell you a story, another reading. This nonfiction story was written by theologian Walter Wink. On a Sunday morning in June 1991, cantor Michael Weiser and his wife Julie were unpacking boxes in their new home when the phone rang. You'll be sorry you ever moved into 5810 Randolph Street, Jew boy, the voice said, and hung up. 2 days later, the Weisers received a manila packet in the mail. The KKK is watching you, scum, read the note. Inside were pictures of Adolf Hitler, caricatures of Jews with hooked noses, blacks with gorilla heads, and graphic depictions of dead blacks and Jews. The hollow hoax was nothing compared to what's going to happen to you, read one quote. The Weisers called the police, who said it looked like the work of Larry Trapp, the state leader or Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. A Nazi sympathizer, he led a cadre of skinheads and Klansmen responsible for terrorizing Asian, Black, and Jewish families in Nebraska and nearby Iowa. He's dangerous, the police warned. We know he makes explosives. Although confined to a wheelchair because of late-stage diabetes, Trapp, 44, was a suspect in the firebombings of several African Americans' homes around Lincoln and was responsible for what he called Operation Gooks, the March 1991 burning of the Indo-Chinese Refugee Assistance Center in Omaha. He later admitted to these crimes. And Trapp was planning to blow up the synagogue where Weiser was the spiritual leader. Trapp lived alone in a drab efficiency apartment. On one wall, he kept a giant Nazi flag and a double life-size picture of Hitler. Next to these hung his white Klan robe with its red belt and hood. He kept assault rifles, pistols, and shotguns within instant reach for the moment when his enemies might come crashing through his door to kill him. In the rear was a secret bunker he built for the coming race wars. We'll go back to Michael and Judy Weiser and Larry Trapp in a few minutes. But first I want to tell you about the writer of that story, Walter Wink. The Weiser story is from The Powers That Be, a slim book in which Walter Wink details the complex and massive structures, physical and metaphysical, which lie behind and within the many systems in our lives. He's talking about everything from AT&T to the World Bank, from the Red Cross to the phone trees that we set up to get meals to congregants in crisis. Wink does that talking in a language which I found startling, the almost medieval language of sin and salvation, angels and demons, powers and principalities. Despite the old-fashioned words, which Wink is careful to define and justify, his premise is more startling still. That radical nonviolence is the only way to escape from what he calls the domination system. Wink explains this system as well, beginning with his experiences working against apartheid in South Africa. Blacks struggling against apartheid in South Africa, he writes, were fully aware that they were fighting not merely white people, but the apartheid system. When police were at the door, people inside would warn, the system is here. When they would see propaganda on television, they would say, the system is lying again. The most effective way to get a Black person to stop behaving in collusion with the government was to say, you're supporting the system. With the clarity that is privy to victims, they recognized that virtually all the individual powers in South Africa conspired together, if only by passive consent, to maintain that unjust system. This overarching network of powers is what we are calling the domination system. It is characterized by unjust economic relations, oppressive political relations, biased race relations, patriarchal gender relations, hierarchical power relations, and the use of violence to maintain them all. No matter what shape the dominating system of the moment might take, from the ancient Near Eastern states to the Pax Romana, to feudal Europe, to communist state capitalism, to modern market capitalism, the basic structure has persisted now for at least 5,000 years. This is a breathtakingly ambitious claim, and it may be Stockholm Syndrome, but I must say that Wink builds his claim and then defends it with a lot of sharp intelligence and practical, accurate information. I found myself nodding along with him quite a lot. He details the rise of militarism and state structures in ancient Mesopotamia, addresses the subjugation of women, and moves forward confidently into the violence of the modern world. He asserts, and here I think he is spot on, that we trust violence. Wink writes, our society is so inured to violence that it finds it hard to believe in anything else. And that phrase, believe in, provides the clue. People trust violence. Violence saves. It is redemptive. But when we make survival the highest goal and death the greatest evil, we hand ourselves over to the gods of the domination system. We trust violence because we are afraid, Wink continues. and we will not relinquish our fears until we are able to imagine a better system, an alternative. What if we are attacked by muggers? What if robbers break into our house? What if someone opens a toxic dump in our neighborhood? What if another nation threatens to wipe us off the face of the planet? Well, yes, I say as the reader, what if those things happen? Wink has answers, and he spells them out somewhat convincingly. Although, or perhaps because he is a Christian theologian, he acknowledges not only all those what ifs, but also church-sponsored violence, violence between nations, violence against women, the violence of oppressors toward the oppressed, and the violence which almost inevitably erupts when the oppressed feel they have nothing left to lose, when, as Howard Thurman says, their backs are against the wall. Wink addresses each of these questions, fears, doubts, but I found myself, as I said, only somewhat convinced. He gives concrete examples of the ways in which nonviolence has worked and reasonable accounts of the ways in which it could work. He has theological reasons for his narrative that speak to a deep commitment and devotion to the Jesus who is on the side of the marginalized. As he puts it gracefully in the epilogue, in a pluralistic world in which we are privileged to learn from all religious and philosophical traditions, we still have a story to tell to the nations. And if we're going to have a Christian story, this one is far more compelling than many other Christian stories that's offered up to us daily. Am I right? And yet, I struggle. Each week, I think about whether I'm appealing to your head, your heart, or your hands. And I try to give you a way to carry that forward into the world during the week. So this week, I invite you to take a few steps further down that road and join me in the struggle, not to just imagine a world of nonviolence, but believe in it, because I am struggling and I think I kind of need for you to be in this struggle with me, and I suspect you might be. So here are Jesus' words again. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of our God in heaven. When Jesus said these words, it's important to remember that he was speaking as one of the poor. He spoke as one who was prepared to be struck upon the cheek, rolled by the state for his coat or cloak, forced to walk a mile or two, begged from, borrowed from. Jesus spoke as a member of the colonized, the imperialized, oppressed in his own land, marginalized by his colonizers and by the collaborators within his own faith. He spoke as someone on the bottom of the social system, the domination system, who recognizes the harm that violence does to the oppressed and the oppressor alike. And yet, all of that changed when empire took up the cause of the cross. It was at the moment that Christianity was catapulted by Constantine from the margins of social standing right to the center. With Constantine, Christianity acquired not only the physical trappings of power, but its metaphysical grandeur as well, the outer garments of gilded finery and the inner workings of potent empire. Despite all this, the message of Jesus didn't change. And a message that says, if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also, sounds very different on the lips of the powerful and the privileged, don't you think? Because our history is one of power gained through violence. The one in power is the one who has most effectively wielded violence. It's a truism. To the victor go the spoils. History is written by the victors. Might makes right. Those who rule make the rules. Except when they don't. except when we are given glimpses of a truth that is so audaciously different. Our certainties are shaken, and our imaginations, no matter how we struggle, kindled. Larry Trapp lived alone in a drab efficiency apartment. On one wall, he kept a giant Nazi flag and a double life-size picture of Hitler. Next to those hung his white Klan robe with its red belt and hood. When Trapp launched a white supremacist TV series on a local public access cable channel featuring men and women saluting a burning swastika and firing automatic weapons, Michael Weiser was incensed. He called Trapp's KKK hotline and left a message on the answering machine. "Larry," he said, "do you know that the very first laws that Hitler's Nazis passed were against people like yourself who had no legs or who had physical deformities or physical handicaps? Do you realize you would have been among the first to die under Hitler? Why do you love the Nazis so much?" Then he hung up. Weiser continued the calls to the machine, and then one day Trapp picked up. "What the F do you want?" he shouted. "I just want to talk to you," said Rabbi Weiser. "Are you black?" Trapp demanded. "Jewish," Weiser replied. "Stop harassing me," said Trapp, and then demanded to know why he was calling. Weiser remembered a suggestion of his wife's. "Well, I was thinking you might need a hand with something, and I wondered if I could help," Weiser ventured. "I know you're in a wheelchair, and I thought maybe I could take you to the grocery store or something." Trapp was too stunned to speak. Then he cleared his throat. "That's okay," he said. "That's nice of you, but I've got that covered. Thanks anyway, but don't call this number anymore." "I'll be in touch," Weiser replied. During a later call, Trapp admitted that he was rethinking a few things. But then he went right back on the radio, spewing the same old hatreds. Furious, Weiser picked up the phone. "It's clear you're not rethinking anything at all." After calling Trapp a liar and a hypocrite, Weiser demanded an explanation. In a surprisingly tremulous voice, Trapp said, "I'm sorry I did that. I've been talking like that all of my life. I can't help it. I'll apologize." That evening, the cantor led the congregation in prayers for the Grand Dragon. The next evening, the phone rang at Michael and Julie Weiser's home. "I want to get out," Trapp said, "but I don't know how." The Weisers offered to go over to Trapp's that night to break bread. Trapp hesitated, then agreed, telling them he lived in apartment number 3. When the Weisers entered Trapp's apartment, he burst into tears and tugged off his 2 swastika rings. Soon all 3 were crying, and then laughing, and then hugging. Trapp resigned from all his racist organizations and wrote apologies to the many people he had threatened and abused. When a few months later, Trapp learned that he had less than a year to live, the Weisers invited him to move into their 2-bedroom, 3-children home. When his condition deteriorated, Julie quit her job as a nurse to care for him, sometimes all night. 6 months later, he converted to Judaism, and 3 months after that, he died. We're not all Michael and Julie Weiser. There are days when I can barely manage to be myself in any real and authentic way. I'm just happy to walk out of the house with pants on and socks that match. The story of the Weisers, like stories of Nelson Mandela, Mohandas Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., the story of Jesus, they're stories that kindle my imagination, but they often have tragic endings, and they're often really hard to believe in. Violence does feel safe to me in many ways. I want to watch superhero movies. I want to watch Indiana Jones punch Nazis. I would like to punch Nazis myself, except that I would cry and be scared. But that said, I am happy to let other people use violence on my behalf. The other thing is, I'm angry. I'm so angry at the evil and the injustice in the world, in our neighborhoods. I'm sad and mad and anxious and sorrowful and baffled and tired. Did I mention mad? I'm mad as hell. I would love to use violence to change things. I feel the rage that rises up with me, and it has its corollary in the ways that my body feels and the ways that I want to respond aggressively. And I know that that's not healthy. One thing I can say for sure, I'm middle-aged. I'm 46 years old, so probably about halfway through my lifespan. And in those 46 years, I've read a lot of history, and I've done a lot of studying, and I've lived a lot of experiences. And I will say this: the movements which had the most lasting transformative power were nonviolent movements. Think about Gandhi and the freeing of his country from colonial rule. Think about Martin Luther King Jr., who, along with the people who protested with him, were abused, reviled, attacked, and beaten. And yet the civil rights movement has had an amazing, powerful impact on America as we know it. Sure, we're in trouble. There are things that were not solved by the Civil Rights Act, and indeed, we have pretty much gutted it in the halls of power. But it's not too late. We have that knowledge. We have it as a culture now that we can resist nonviolently, and it does bring about change. But it is so, so scary. Walter Wink offers narratives and statistics that prove that nonviolence can work on the personal as well as the systemic level. But it doesn't change the fact that I still feel vulnerable, that you do, that we are, in fact, still vulnerable. And although I think there are beliefs and dreams worth dying for, it turns out that I'd be much happier living for them. I struggle because I want to argue with Walter Wink and with Jesus. I don't want to turn the other cheek. I don't want to give my coat away. It's cold outside, and mostly I feel like the person slapping my face and stealing my coat is a bully, not a victim just like me. But maybe the failure of nonviolence as a philosophy is a failure in me, a failure of imagination, a failure of faith. My fear, my lived experience, my oh so rational and pragmatic life, the past 4 years in particular, they've all brought me and perhaps you to a place where violence feels like an answer, where nonviolence feels like a mirage, a flickering candle, a fantasy with no bearing on our modern lives. Despite this, when I do look out across the desert, when I creep towards that chalice flame that is perhaps the light flickering, when I allow myself to dream of the peace that comes only with justice, I hear the voices that came before, calling to me and to you and to the world with a message of truth and love, satyagraha and suffering-fueled transformation. I want to answer those voices. I want to be better than I am, and I wonder if maybe I someday could be. But I don't have answers. And so today, I simply invite you to be here with me, to be in the struggle, to be swept up with me by the beauty of nonviolence, and to be skeptical with me as to how it can protect those who are already vulnerable. Most vitally, I just invite you to be in community with me, and I share this prayer here at the end, because maybe you too don't quite know what to do with all the tangles and tensions and pain and words you have. And so, dear God, no. Spirit of life, no. God we know by many names, no. To whom it may concern, yes. To whom it may concern, I am concerned because my cat has a scratch on her nose and it's taking a long time to heal. I'm concerned because I do trust violence, especially violence done on my behalf, done by the state, done by the oppressed. I'm concerned because a new virus has killed 1.3 million of our neighbors, And it feels like there's nowhere to go, nowhere to flee the invisible predator that's cutting us down, like God, like you, far away, unknowable, implacable. I'm concerned that I'm already tired of 2021 and it's November of 2020. It's concerning. I'm concerned because I can feel the list of names to be read during the Transgender Day of Remembrance, and it's getting longer and longer, and our country seems suddenly to have forgotten how to treat queer folks like real whole humans. I'm concerned because instead of talking about police brutality against brown and black folks, people are talking about brown and black folks kneeling and marching to protest police brutality. That's concerning. Also, some other words, but this is a family-friendly prayer, and you already know those words anyway. Sometimes those words are my holy words. I'm concerned because people in Flint, Michigan still don't have clean drinking water, and neither do people in Puerto Rico or West Texas. I'm concerned because the director of the EPA says this is no time to talk about climate change, and the Texas Ledge says this is no time to talk about gun control, and Congress says this is no time to talk about corruption, and most white people say this is no time to address racial injustice. And all I can ask then is when? For the sake of all that is holy, when? I'm concerned that my rotator cuff is slowly deteriorating. Also, I'm really bad at meditation. How do you sit still for that long? And money, money is always a thing that I'm concerned about. Money is the worst. I'm concerned that I don't believe in you, God, but I'm talking to you in public, no less. I'm concerned that your silence is consent to the evil in the world, to the sorrow and the outrage and the injustice, consent to the lack of love, of kindness, of justice in the world. To whom it may concern, I'm talking to you nevertheless. I'm talking to you because in the midst of our weariness and our rage, our fear and sorrow and exhaustion, there is a you who I might believe in, who I could believe in. The you that I might believe in, the one to whom I am of concern, we are of concern, that you is in the faces of my friends and loved ones, the people in this room together with us, the people absent from this room. That you is in the voices and the love of the church that I serve, and the family that welcomes me when I come home, and the people around the world who are struggling to create something better for all of us. That you that I could believe in is the words of the scripture that we hear that tells us to be doers of the word spoken in love, the word that says, fear not, the word that says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That you I might believe in is speaking to me through those faces and voices and that love, the words and the word and my own enduring, foolish, life-saving hope for the beloved community and your hope too. And I know that although you can't or won't fix those things, and thank you for that, the you that I might believe in is here with me, an unknowable mystery, or the simple fact of human compassion and connection. I don't ask you to solve our problems. They're ours. We have to solve them ourselves. But perhaps I could be glad that this God who I might believe in is here with me, with us. The unending possibility of transformation, the willingness to be doers of love's word, the mystery that shows us hope even when we are tired and angry. And so to whom it may concern, if you can do nothing else, be here with us, and maybe that will be enough. Amen.
William Schultz said, "Religion and justice are born on each other's wings. What makes them such soulmates? Every single one of us knows what it is like to bleed. Every one of us has experienced pain. If that were not a fact of human existence, we might not notice the suffering of the world. But because it is, we do. Every single one of us knows what it is like to bleed. In one respect, pain is a gift because it cultivates our imagination. Without it, we would be far less likely to rail at deprivation or shrink from cruelty. In the heart of every stranger lurks a reflection of our own. By supporting Community UU Church, you can acknowledge and act on the suffering of the world, because we are committed as a church to knowing what it is like to bleed and to staunch the bleeding of the world where we can, through our commitment to justice, through our community garden, through outreach to schools and the food pantry. And of course, through the building of this online community when so many people are desperate for connection. Please give to Community UU Church to support justice, community, and these online services. You can give online. Just go to our website, uuplano.org, and click on the blue Donate Now button. Thank you. We appreciate your gifts, large and small.
Peace, salam, shalom. 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 Peace, salam, shalom.
We believe in peace.
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 Salam, shalom.
We will work for 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 peace.
Salam, shalom.
We can live in 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 peace.
Salam, shalom. Peace, 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 salam, shalom.
Please join me in saying the words we use for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Shalom, blessed be. Amen.
I leave you today with this benediction, the words of Mahatma Gandhi. Nonviolence does not mean meek submission to the will of the evildoer, but it means the pitting of one's whole soul against the will of the tyrant. Working under this law of our being, it is possible for a single individual to defy the whole might of an unjust empire. Blessed be and amen, and I will see you very shortly.